Well, the first thing I want to mention then is all the podcasts are about basically about ritual abuse, I guess. And I don't want to make them redundant, but this little spiel at the beginning, I think I'll do for each one. So basically what ritual abuse is, it's raping a kid and then adding everything you need to do to get away with it. That's all it is. There's two things. There's a crime being committed and there's getting away with a crime. So, right, you rob a store, wear a mask. Rape a kid, wear a mask. I got all this stuff written down here. Right, you rob a store, you use violence. You rape a kid, you use violence. You rob a store, you use a weapon. Rape a kid, you use a weapon. Rob a store, you threaten the witnesses. Rape a kid, you threaten the witnesses, right? Every victim of assault is also a witness to it. Right, you rob a store, you intimidate the folks so you can gain their cooperation. Same thing when you're raping a child. What else? Rob a store, you plant misleading evidence. That's pretty easy to do. Same thing if you rape a child, plant misleading evidence. Right, and then pay off the cops. Depending on how big the robbery is and how complex. That's one thing you can do if you're going to rob somebody. It's also something you can do if you're going to rape kids. And this goes on and on and on. So all it is a crime, and what they combined with that crime is everything they need to get away with it. And what that comes down to is combined with extreme violence, extreme deception, right? That's what all the satanic theater and stuff is, because that terrorizes a kid who's 6 years old, and then mind and memory altering drugs. So that stuff is added to the rape. They integrate it all into this big theater, and that's what's called ritual abuse. But that's all it is. All it comes down to, they rape kids, they have to get away with it, so they have to do whatever needs to be done to get away with it. That's what that stuff is all about. So, I guess that's all. So I might do something like that at the beginning of each one, just to kind of set the context, because it really needs to be demystified for people to wrap their head around it. You know, it's all the devil stuff. I mean, this is my experience. There's a lot of reality to that when you're 6 years old and you're on belladonna and you're on drugs.
Yeah.
But it's just a lot of smoke and mirrors. And they do it so when the kid, they actually make the child afraid to remember. I mean, that's the bottom line. You're afraid to remember what happened. How can you be a witness? And if you start talking about it, like the PTSD kicks in and, you know, you can't really make sense and blah, blah, blah. So,
Right.
so that's basically,
great.
you know, just a reminder. It's not all this whatever other stuff people think it is.
People can relate to robbing a store robbery. And
Right.
I always thought, if it was another crime, because so like we hear about this, and then people go to the church to
Right.
report it to the church. And so our thing is like, well, it's a crime, like it's rape. So it's a matter for the police. So, and you know, if people like are like rationalizing it. So, I mean,
Right.
Catholics like who don't want to think that Father did that. And but if it's another crime, like and we talk about wounds. If there's
Right.
if you come out of the rectory with a black eye and a broken arm or something.
Oh, exactly. Right.
It's obvious they're you know, and so I think that's good to draw that, to take them, demystify it.
Yeah, a little bit. Trying to.
Demystify it.
I may not have presented my case that well, but you know what I mean.
That's good. Yeah.
Right? There's a crime and there's whatever you have to do to get away with it.
Yes.
All that stuff to get away with it. That's what the rituals are. That's all it is.
And I don't know, let you have the floor, but what bothers me is when there's no justice, is like a normal crime, like the store robbery or whatever. This is many times worse. But when there's no justice for the perpetrators, who carries the burden for the crime?
Oh yeah, of course.
And so that's one part of why there needs to be justice is because there's crime victims and there's perpetrators. And the
Right.
victim should never have to carry the burden of the crime, of the
Right.
deed.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Just for right now on Earth, there's 3 billion men of sexually active age. And the statistics are about 1% of men are pedophile. Depends, anywhere between 0.5% and 3%, whatever. So that's about 30 million active pedophiles on planet Earth right now.
You said just men. There's women too.
Well, yeah, that is true. And I got
to a lesser degree, but yes.
That's even more.
Absolutely. And that's usually about 1% of the amount of men. So that
Right,
would be
right.
3 million active women that are active pedophile. So that's a lot of people. It's something to think about. And then the one thing I wanted to talk about, I guess, because it's all I could think of, was everything you're up against when you're trying to talk about this to somebody. And I'm just going to kind of go through this and hope I make any sense. But we all have a worldview. People have a worldview of what they think is normal. And like I said before, that's that little box of awareness in between the evil and the that's being hidden and the good that's being suppressed. But if you start telling somebody something that greatly contradicts their worldview, it makes them start to feel a little bit crazy. And the example I came up with, if you were in Germany trying to convince people that Grandpa Hitler was doing all these horrible things all over the world, they would look at you like you were out of your mind. And when you contradict somebody's worldview, it makes them feel a little bit crazy, but they associate that with who? With the person that's making the statements. So it's very easy for them to see you as being crazy, and then it causes a separation, and so on. So that's the first thing, is whenever you're contradicting a worldview, the person is going to think that you're the one that's crazy. They're going to get that feeling and associate it with you. The same thing with all the facts. If I'm telling somebody about all these horrible things that happen, it's like that guy over there did this horrible stuff to that little kid over there. But the words that are coming out of my mouth are associated with me, because our frontal lobe here can make those distinctions, but mostly you're going to associate whatever pictures are coming up into your mind with the person who's telling you the story. So again, nobody wants to identify with that. And it's going to make it difficult for people to really want to take you seriously. And certainly they can't identify. They can't identify with the victims. So what else? So the perpetrators, generally if the perpetrator is an adult who's a priest, who's very well respected in society, then you're going to have all these positive associations with this guy. Someone you're trying to tell this is going to have all these positive associations. So he's an adult, he's respected, he's with God. He's an authority figure, which means he's a father figure, parent figure, admired, dominant male, the winner, he's sane, he's strong. And as a father, this is something I've noticed. When there's an authority figure, all authority figures are parent figures to our subconscious. That's known. And if somebody had a good dad and they see this authority figure and they're going to associate that with their dad, they're going to have no reason to want to question that. And what I've seen also with like politicians, that if you had a dad that wasn't so good, then this politician becomes a good father you never had. I don't know if this is making sense, but I've seen that especially with people who follow Trump. So either way, this guy has an advantage psychologically. If you're trying to tell somebody about something that this authority figure did, and then you're, as the victim, what is that? That's all the opposite stuff of that. You know, you're nervous, afraid. You're the child. The victim is not a predator, but he's the prey. The victim is a loser. The victim, he's ridiculed, called crazy. The victim's the one who's been dominated. He's weak. So the person you're talking to, especially I'm kind of coming from the blue collar world I came out of, you can't identify with the victim. Nobody wants to identify with the victim because it makes you very uncomfortable. You can't identify with somebody who's weak and dominated and beaten up and everything. And it's easy to identify with the perpetrator. It's easy to identify with the dominant male, the authority figure, the father figure. So you got all that against you when you're trying to talk to people, and it's just natural psychology. And what happens, of course, if you add that with all the other things, there's a separation. The person that you're talking to is going to start feeling, they're going to separate themselves from the victim who's reporting these crimes. They're not really going to hear the facts because the psychology takes over. It's like, I'm not identifying with you because there's something wrong with you, and I am identifying with this priest because he's the good guy. So, and then there's a lot you can add to that. There's something called false memory syndrome. I don't know if you ever heard of that. False memory syndrome was it's actually not even science. It's an accusation that lawyers for the government pulled out of their behinds when a bunch of people were suing the government because of MK Ultra. And there's no science to support that whatsoever. And I can't remember the guy's name. Some PhD who was part of MK Ultra came up with this idea of false memory syndrome. And then they took it to their extreme. They sued some shrinks. They intimidated some people. They took away a couple of people's license, and they swept all those lawsuits under the rug. But the thing about false memory syndrome is people come up, they've had horrible symptoms for 30 years. How is it that a shrink planted false memories in them if they've had the symptoms already for 30 years? It's ridiculous. It's not science at all. There's the other thing, this chemical imbalance idea, that they'll use that a lot to explain away people's symptoms. And again, that's bogus. It's kind of flawed. I guess I could compare it like if I had a thorn in my hand, you could decide that my pain is not coming from the thorn, it's coming from electrochemical imbalance between my hand and my brain. And then to prove it, you could give me a few Vicodins. Take the Vicodins, the pain goes away. Now see that? It was a chemical problem that needed a chemical solution. The thorn had nothing to do with it. And as ridiculous as that sounds, that is how it applied to mental illness, which most mental illness is caused by trauma. We know that. So you have these things that are, what's the word? They're masquerading as science that are out there discrediting, people's testimony. There's also this stranger danger movement. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I do.
That came out in the 80s. And that was after this MK Ultra stuff and the church stuff. There was like a big movement about satanic ritual abuse back in the 80s. And that all got put down, swept under the rug. And the stranger danger thing came out in all the schools. But if you examine what stranger danger is, it's basically telling children that if some weird stranger tries to touch you, run to an authority figure and you'll be okay. Well, 90% of the kids getting molested are molested by authority figures. Father, father's best friend, uncle, priest, cop. And then the implication of that, of course, is that people who molest kids are weird strangers. And it took the heat off of the real perpetrators, which are, respectable men that are in positions of authority, and put it in this context of weird stranger on the corner. And of course, it didn't do anything but scare kids. Mm-hmm. I remember my son, he was little, he went through all that stuff. And we were walking, he saw some frumpy old guy, looked kind of grumpy and stuff, just an old man. He goes, "Daddy, is that a stranger?" What are you talking about? So this is how they were brainwashing these kids. And what if they were actually concerned about the children, they would have done the opposite. They would have educated the parents and the teachers of what these are the signs of a child who's being abused in secret. If you see these signs, then take these actions, blah, 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 and left the kids out of it. Let the kids be kids.
Is that about the time, excuse me, the
Yeah.
milk, remember the milk cartons? And who drinks, they put the
yeah.
missing children on the milk cartons.
Right.
And who drinks out of the milk cartons? Usually it's the kids that are, right?
Oh, yeah.
And, so I think all the missing children, it had nothing to do with, when we know now, like what was going on with people who weren't strangers, perpetrators who were not strangers.
Right.
But a lot, all that focus and stuff was on the, like you said, the stranger danger back then.
Right. It was a national like operation that unfolded, and it did the opposite of what it claimed to do. So you add that to false memory syndrome and the chemical imbalance, that thing. And then there's other things like I found, I hope I'm making sense here,
You are.
that you can have a whole mountain of evidence, 500 pages of really well put together evidence and 2 pages of inconsistencies over here and little problems. People will latch onto those inconsistencies just like that. And that'll be what gets magnified in the media, so they can ignore all the evidence that they don't want to think about in the first place. So that's happened several times. I can't remember anything. Right. Then they can also put ridiculous witnesses out there. I've seen that. People who are obviously either lying or being silly, putting them out in front and center to discourage or to discredit all the other witnesses. They can falsely accuse somebody. That's been done, falsely accuse somebody and then publicize that happened and how horribly this guy was falsely accused and that. That's done also to take the heat off the real perpetrators. There's I don't know, there's a lot of religious kind of philosophies people grab onto that kind of let them off the hook. It's karma or it's this or Jesus will take care of it, or those things are all fine, like for normal, you have philosophies about getting through life, but something like this, I don't think those philosophies apply. This is more of something that if you know about it, it might be good that you'd want to do something about it just because you're a human being. But there's a lot of different philosophies you can grab onto that let you off the hook. So that's out there. Well, here's another one. I don't know if this will make sense, but I know one mental health professional very personally, and she has this thing where she's in the in crowd. If you believe in the science, you know more about, like she knows more about my memories than I do. That's what she even told me. And I just noticed like she was identifying with that, like the liberal Democrat, whatever, which is fine. I mean, I'm a liberal Democrat too. But it was a way of, it was, I guess, part of her identity. And in order for her to keep her identity, she had to keep denying these things in order to be connected with all these scientists that were putting out all this false memory syndrome, chemical imbalance problem, all this stuff. So for whatever was that, this. And the other thing I think is important, I hope this is worth listening to. People don't really have a frame of reference for any of this.
No, you're
In
right.
my example of this, I went to a dentist when I was young and my teeth were messed up because they had put electrodes on them. And I mean, that was part of the torture and stuff. But he had no frame of reference for that. So what he goes, "You've been brushing your teeth way too vigorously." That's all I could think of because he's a dentist, right? He made me get a soft toothbrush and then told me not to brush so vigorous. And I remember that. It's like most people are the same way with it. There's no frame of reference. There's no way to know like if this is real or not. They have all these things out in the media and then the pop culture they can grab onto to deny it or to dismiss it. So most people are going to do that because who wants to think about this crap anyway?
So that would be a red flag. Like that could be a red flag for a dentist to say what's going on. Like, that could potentially bring light
Oh,
to the
absolutely,
truth
right.
to the crimes going on. So
Right.
because of the lack of frame of reference, it just gets bypassed or explained away as something else.
Exactly. And that's all he could come up with. I was brushing too vigorously. I remember, and at the time I hadn't really remembered what happened, but I knew that wasn't something, didn't make any sense with that. But everybody's like that. There's no frame of reference for this because, I mean, if you look at the media, there's just nothing but crap, I saw a thing where Disney had to do something about Snow White because the prince gave her a non-consensual kiss. And it's like, are you kidding me? This is what you're going to put in the media. The most trivial, I mean, it is true, but it's so trivial in comparison to what's really going on.
Yeah.
That's what you see in the media. And young kids growing up in this, that's their worldview. They have no frame of reference for anything real, like these real assaults that are going on and, whatever, all the secret dealings that start all these wars and everything. So, all right, so that's, and of course, the other thing is all these crimes are done in secret. Because of course, if they don't do it in secret, they'll get caught. I mean, it's really simple. So of course you don't hear about it, you don't see it. I don't know how many people I've heard that say, well, I never heard of that. Well, of course not. No one's gonna rape a kid in the middle of Main Street. It's secret, so you're not gonna hear about it. But if you add all this stuff together that I've been talking about here, right? The crazy feeling someone gets when you're opposing their worldview, they associate that with the person reporting the facts. Everything that the victim reports, you're associating that with the victim because the words are coming out of his mouth. If he's talking about all this sickening stuff, no matter what's going on up here, the rest of your body is associating that with the victim, and you're not going to want to identify with him at all. Right? There's all this science to disprove it, it's all bogus, but it seems like science. And I mean, I could tackle each one of these false memory syndrome and chemical imbalance for an hour, but I would want to write notes and everything. And I've done that in some of my other videos. But it's all bogus. It's not science. It pretends to be science.
As far as there's those theories or whatever you would call them, the bogus theories.
Right.
They wouldn't be theories, right? Or just the excuses. False memory syndrome and chemical imbalance. That's still active. They're still using that. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that never got debunked or whatever.
No.
So we've got a long way to go because
Right.
all this that is garbage that is still out there being pushed as science.
Right.
And
Oh,
there's
absolutely.
no backing, nothing to back it up.
Right. And that's in all the sciences too. I study free energy stuff a lot. There's so much physics that's being kept from us and so much nonsense that's being thrown in our faces.